I just want to pick up on this stuff to do with objectification according to gender, the sexual objectification of women, and what's been referred to as the objectification of men in terms of success, so that the men are valued as success objects. Okay, let me just see if I've got this right in terms of the first part of that, which is to do with the sexual objectification of women. My understanding is that men have certain desires, and this isn't the only theory in town, but men have certain desires which are possibly developed from evolutionary history for certain kinds of women, perhaps women who are displaying the outward physical signs of fecundity, let's say, large breasts, thick lips, glossy hair showing health, or those kind of things. And men have a particularly strong desire for those kinds of women, and also feeding into that part of the power logic of male-female relationships leads to a certain kind of objectification of women. So what you get is a sexual objectification of women driven by male desire, and that sexual objectification has negative effects. It has negative effect in terms of the empowerment of women, or the subservience of women. If women feel like objects in a certain kind of way, then there's a kind of passivity associated with that. And it's also exclusive in the sense that if a woman feels that she doesn't live up to those particular desires, then she feels less of a woman as a result of that. And there's all kinds of hierarchies which fall out of that, as well as, of course, the more strongly felt negative aspects of it to do with the treating of women as commodities, the kind of the rise of the pornographic imagination, the whole consumer aspect of sexuality associated with the pornographic imagination, the objectification of women, the legitimization of things like rape, as tacit usually, but sometimes completely overtly. So all those things kind of fall out of this process through which women are objectified as sex objects because of the desires of men. Okay, it's okay so far. Second thing I want to say is there seems to be a correlate of that within women. I mean, I know quite a few women who regard themselves as feminists. My wife would regard herself as a feminist and was very active, particularly in New York. She was a close friend of an organisation called the Guerrilla Girls, and she was involved in WAC and one or two other organisations out there. So she knows what she speaks, I think, but she'd be the first to admit, and I've had conversations with her, and she's very open about the fact that being an intellectual feminist sometimes feels as if it's counter to a kind of innate desire that women might have. This is her words, so I'm perhaps putting words into her mouth, but I think it's fair to say that she and many other women, and somebody like Annie Sprinkle, who I've talked about before, are very clear on this one, would say that that it feels good to be sexually attractive. All politics to one side for one moment, it feels good to put on high heels and to look at yourself in the mirror. It feels good to know that your hair is glossy in a certain way. Looking in the mirror and turning sideways and you've got big boobs, it feels great. You feel good about yourself to have those, to have all the qualities that one would need in order to be a sex object. And in many ways, the raising of feminist consciousness is about trying to find alternative ways of gaining self-satisfaction or a satisfaction with one's own identity that isn't responding to that feel-good sense that many, if not all, women are in possession of. Okay, so that's the first part. Let me just rehearse that again, because I'm not sure if I've got it really. That male desire fuels sexual objectification of women. Women's actions in response to that sexual objectification, or the corresponding actions and feelings of women in relation to that sexual objectification, in some ways compounds the problem, contributes towards the problem possibly, but certainly is in keeping with that objectification. Women enjoy feeling, whether they like it or not, like sex objects. The feeling of looking like that. Okay. The second part I want to just talk about is this idea of success objects. this might be too long for one video. Success objects is this term that's sometimes bandied around about what the corresponding aspect of being a man is in terms of attractiveness, and clearly we're not sex objects for the most part. Men, some men look sexier than others, but we're not really sex objects in quite the same way. What seems to, if I can put this crudely, what seems to gain the best access to reproductive resources, in other words, the men who score the most, or who score best with sexually attractive women, are not sexually attractive men. It's successful men who have access to economic power, men who have access to political power, and sometimes even men who have access to physical power. That's so stereotypical that it's almost an irrelevance to mention it, but it's very, very evident that if you want to be that being successful is sexy in male terms, not being displaying these signs of fecundity I talked about earlier on. And to be honest, as a man, it feels good to be successful. In the kind of corresponding way that I'm imagining it feels good as a woman to look sexy in a mirror, it feels good to be successful as a man. This whole thing about men in boardrooms swinging their dicks around. I mean, that's absolutely right. It feels fantastic when you're winning as a man. When you're, it feels right. It doesn't feel right to be a loser. It doesn't feel right. You feel less of a man if you are, not pursuing wealth. If you are not pursuing success. If you are not engaged in competition. All of those that kind of new age man stuff, which I was very involved in myself in the 1980s, which was an attempt to do that same kind of consciousness raising thing, to try to find other ways of feeling satisfied as a man without doing the competitive stuff and without doing the swinging dick thing. That's extremely hard, because there's a lot of compulsion in us to follow that script. Okay, the last thing I want to say is just what's the negative consequences of that. The negative consequences for women taking on the role of sex objects because it feels right are ones I've already spoken about. Disempowerment, leaving yourself open to rape, passivity, all those things. What are the negative consequences of men buying into the success object narrative? And it's a very, very strongly felt sense. Well, I think a lot of the problems of the world actually are a result of that. I think a lot of the conflict in the world. I think a lot of the economic disparities in the world. I think a lot of the disparities in power relationships in the world are exactly to do with that. I think there is a feminist argument that it's that male aggression is behind a lot of the problems in the world. I think that's absolutely right. I think a lot of the problems are down to that kind of swinging dick logic of men feeling good about being powerful and pursuing that feel-good feeling. But what's the consequence of that? The consequence for that is difficult, I think, because surely if men are responsible for the objectification of women and the negative consequences that flow from that, who is responsible for the success objectification of men and the negative consequences which flow out of that? Is it women? Shall we be looking to women to blame for finding successful men attractive? Is that where the logic leads? That it's the women's fault? Don't find attractive, successful men attractive. Don't go for those men. Go for losers. Go for guys who live in small cabins. Go for those guys. Go for guys who have got no money. Go for guys who run the dole, because that would be the moral thing to do. If you're attracted to, mature men who run corporations, or if you're attracted to wealthy and powerful mafia gangsters, if you're attracted to people who are in government, then you're following the success objectification of men, and the negative consequences of women are your fault. I'm not really sure if I believe any of this stuff, but that's where it seems the logic goes, and I'd be very interested to hear what people have got to say about that. Thank you.